And our guest speaker is God Hawks from Canada. He has a consultancy that deals with international tax administration. But before getting into this work, he worked with the Canada Revenue Authority for 37 years before retiring in 2019. And during his time at the Canada Revenue Authority, he has been able to develop assessment frameworks to determine the extent to which the Canada Revenue Agency is a world-class tax and benefit administration. He's done a lot of program evaluation and performance measurements. And since his retirement from the Canada Revenue Agency, sorry about that, he's done a lot of short-term expert work with the IMF, mainly under the TADAT training, but also as a TADAT assessor. His most recent assignment, he has provided technical assistance with the Libya Tax Authority in developing their reform strategies.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Welcome everybody, good afternoon. It's early 4 o'clock here in Ottawa, Canada, and I have to report that it's minus 21 degrees Celsius outside, so I'm sure it's a little cooler here than it is where you are. By way of introduction, I just want to pick up on a few things. Is that I've spent 37 years with the Canada Revenue Agency, and most of that time was in program evaluation. So I have a fairly decent understanding of how tax administration works, and mostly looking at programs, tax programs, from an effectiveness perspective, and really trying to get a sense of how effective Canada Revenue Agency programs were and to what extent they were achieving objectives. As I say, it's a pleasure to be here today. This is one of my favorite subjects. We're going to be talking about linkages. Maybe before we get to that, I'll just talk a bit about my exposure to the TADAT in conducting an assessment of the Canada Revenue Agency as a world-class tax and benefit administration. Back in 2017, the commissioner was new to the organization, and he had heard that we were a very good organization. He had heard the expression world-class over and over and over again, but he had not seen any evidence to show that we were a world-class tax and benefit administration. So he tasked my team to look at the agency to determine to what extent are we world-class. And that got me to pondering, and my colleagues to pondering, how are we going to do this? This is a major undertaking. We didn't have a framework to use. And so what we did was put our heads together, and my colleague, Ali Udiera, said, well, there's this tool called the TADAT. And it's standardized, it's objective, it will probably do exactly what we want to do. And so we used the TADAT as the foundation piece in looking at the Canada Revenue Agency. It wasn't the only piece. We also wanted to determine to what extent we were world-class in our benefits administration. So we developed our own diagnostic tool, and we called it the Benefits Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool after the TADAT. But unfortunately, the acronym was BADAT. And we didn't want to start out as being bad at anything. So we quickly changed the name of that diagnostic tool to the BACDAT, which stood for the Benefits Administration Complementary Diagnostic Assessment Tool. We also wanted to look at how we were seen by our population, by Canadians, because we felt we wouldn't be world-class unless we were world-class in the eyes of Canadians. And the last thing we looked at was innovation within the organization. So that's my background with respect to the TADAT and the use of the TADAT. And it was the use of the TADAT in doing this assessment that really started to show to me the power of the tool. And because it demonstrated that despite the fact that we thought we would get A's and at least a few B's, we got 3 D's and we had at least 3 C's in the TADAT assessment. But more generally, what the TADAT did for us was really give us a sense of how interrelated our tax administration is and how dependent we are on the linkages between the various aspects of our organization. So in other words, if I could, no single program within a tax administration can operate independently to objectives achievement. Think about that for a moment. There is no single program that can operate in isolation to achieve objectives of the tax administration. In other words, every single program has some dependency on another program to achieve its objectives. So that's powerful. And the TADAT is powerful because it speaks to those linkages. It speaks to the importance of those linkages in determining how well a tax administration is functioning. So what this screen shows is the independent POAs of the TADAT. It shows all 9 POAs, but more importantly, it also shows the general functional model of most tax administrations. In other words, when we look at this, when we look at the integrity of the registered taxpayer base, really that's synonymous with registration compliance. We also see that there is an area, filing compliance, payment compliance, reporting compliance, taxpayer services, and dispute resolution. So what this does is it shows both the POAs of the TADAT, but also reflects the typical structure of any tax administration that follows a functional model. And in this particular slide, it shows them all independently. And in fact, a lot of tax administrations operate in this fashion. They operate with silos or within silos relative to each of their compliance objectives. So you'll look at reporting compliance. Typically, reporting compliance or audit operates in a silo independent of other areas such as filing or such as payment or such as registration compliance. But what the TADAT does is it provides us with a more robust overview of the interrelations of the TADAT elements, the POAs. And this model can also show, or does also show, the interrelations within the actual functional model of tax administrations. It shows the complexity of how each element is dependent on other elements of the tax administration. So when I first showed this slide to Justin back in, I believe it was 2018, he thought it was excellent. And I said, yes, it's very complex. And he goes, you have to include this in the report to your senior management. And I said, well, I think it's too complex. And he goes, that's the point. It is complex. Tax administration is complex. Linkages between the various elements is complex. And so what you would have learned earlier in your training session is one example of the linkages, or an aspect of linkages, is when we look at the integrity of the registered taxpayer base. When we look at that, it's number one because it has a direct influence on everything else we do within tax administration. The accuracy, the adequacy, the completeness, and the authenticity of the data that we gather at the front end impacts every aspect of what we do. And that's why we see these lines going to things like timely filing of declarations. We know that without accurate information, without knowing who is active and who is not active within the registered base, we can't determine the extent to which filing compliance is being achieved. And similarly, we can't determine to what extent payment compliance is being achieved. We also recognize, too, that the data that we capture at the front end influences and allows us to risk score for our audit function to determine how they will deal with their population and the selection of their cases. So it is a complex structure. Complexity lies in the interrelations, But more importantly, what this does is that it shows, or it allows us to examine these associations to expose the weaknesses within the tax administration that contributes to poor performance. It also allows us to connect the dots that can lead to informed decision making to improve tax administration scores and, more importantly, tax administration processes. What do we mean by that? Okay. Now I want to use the example of our TADAT assessment. As I said, the agency, the Canada Revenue Agency, did not score all A's. We did not score all B's. And in fact, in some of these areas, we had D's. In one specific area, we had a D, was the timely resolution of disputes. Now, if we go back to the previous slide, here, if we looked at the timely resolution of disputes independent of everything else, and we looked at our D score, our tendency would be to look at the actual dispute resolution process to determine what we needed to do to improve that D score. That may not be what we needed to do. When we go back to look at the complexity of the structure, we see that dispute resolution is impacted by audit, and it's impacted by the non-filer program, which exists in the area responsible for filing of declarations, and it's impacted by the timely payment of taxes. Each of these areas create work for the disputes process. In fact, the inventory of the disputes resolution area is coming from these three areas predominantly, and predominantly the audit area. So if we were to react to that D score without a recognition of these linkages, we would likely have failed to do the right thing if we were to look at the dispute resolution process exclusively. Because what that tells us, what that D score tells us, is that the inventory that we're receiving from these other areas may be what's problematic. It could be that our auditors are not being empathetic in their dealings with taxpayers. They're completing the audit and saying, the audit's done, you can appeal if you wish. Or maybe the auditors aren't interpreting the facts correctly and have made mistakes. Or there is an incorrect interpretation of the law, or some other problem with the actual audit function as opposed to the dispute resolution function. The other point I want to make too is that when we looked at timely payment of taxes, one of the areas we looked at was the stock of arrears. We knew our stock of arrears was old. In fact, I think it was 60% of our stock of arrears were over 12 months old. Again, if we were to focus on the score and focus only on our collections, we would be doing ourselves a disservice. This model allows us to say, where are those areas that feed the debt load of the agency? And again, by looking at these other areas, we can now start to determine the extent to which they impact that aging debt and to what extent they contribute to the aging debt. So maybe it's not a matter of getting more collectors. Maybe it's a matter of refining our processes earlier in the stage or earlier in the process, such as at audit or such as at the non-filer program or other programs within the tax administration. So this is what we mean by linkages, and this is what we mean by the importance of understanding the linkages, because without that broader understanding, we could, in fact, do the wrong thing. And we want to make sure we use the TADAT to the extent it was intended. And that is that it is that robust look. It is that look at the tax administration as a system and looking at all those interrelationships to determine what we need to do vis-a-vis the scores we get through a TADAT assessment. I've done a lot of talking. I don't want to necessarily do all the talking. I know I've invited Demekrine Nyandigisi. I'm sorry, Demekrine, if I pronounced your last name wrong. Democrene has been working with a group of tax administrators around, would it be correct to say around the world, and looking at the strength of these linkages and looking at it more from statistical relevance, correlations, and things of that nature. And maybe, Democrene, you can explain or provide some information to the participants on what your group is doing in this space. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gord. A brilliant presentation on interlinkages. And as you mentioned, a group of tax assessors and TADAT trained individuals came together in November to give feedback and to analyze a study that is being conducted by the TADAT Secretariat and some TADAT assessors and TADAT trained officers on the correlations and the significance of these correlations of dimensions. And the first insight that we had is that as tax administrations, we are working in silos, consciously or subconsciously. A number of examples have been mentioned, but one key example that I want to give is on performance outcome area 1. The adequacy and accuracy of the taxpayer register. And I'll pose a question to the senior tax administration officials here. How often do we take time or put in resources towards ensuring the taxpayer register is accurate and to ensure that the information gathered is adequate? We rarely take much time, or we rarely put in resources to take care of the taxpayer register. However, when we fail to do that and put in so much resources in performance outcome area 3, enhancing voluntary compliance. So we go out, and this area has talked about this. We have road shows, we have these campaigns, and we get materials to the taxpayers. We waste resources in trying to reach out to taxpayers because the information that you have in your database is inaccurate. So most tax administrations are now investing in the customer relationship management tool. So if you implement a customer relationship management tool, this tool has to feed from the taxpayer register, because then it's going to send out messages to taxpayers, but it has to get the taxpayer information from the taxpayer register. So if the information in the register is inaccurate, then what means is that the customer relationship management tool is going to be ineffective. It costs a lot to purchase a customer relationship management tool. However, if these two divisions, or if these two processes were married, or if communication is enhanced on how these two divisions work. In most cases, it is housed under the taxpayer relations unit, taxpayer division unit, and the register is mostly managed under domestic taxes department in most tax administrations. So if communication is enhanced on how we work, or if tax administrations take time to see how best to cluster these two, then you will realize that what you're likely to yield is you're likely to get better results than if these two are not married. Another key example I want to give is on initiatives. This is performance outcome area 1, dimension 2, initiatives taken to detect non-compliant taxpayers. We have initiatives being conducted, tax-based initiatives being conducted every so often. However, how often do we have research done and intelligence gathering before we run into implementing initiatives? Rarely do we marry the two. We quickly run to conduct initiatives, which are not backed by research or intelligence gathering. Now, that simply means that you are going to have very minimal insight on the taxpayer behavior, which research would have helped you in identifying the taxpayer behavior. You were not going to understand what initiatives to apply where. You're not going to have a better understanding of the taxpayer sectors. So again, this is another interlinkage that surprised us. And why am I giving these examples? I'm giving these examples because I think where we sit as tax administrations, we believe that how we have structured our processes, our business processes, is perfect. But we are indeed working in silos. And these correlations, these interlinkages are very important in helping us rethink, sit back and think and say, okay, if I am to improve on-time filing, if I'm to improve on on-time payment or audit, dispute resolution, what do I need to look at? What other process do I need to look at that is going to add value to the outcome of what I'm doing? And I like what Commissioner DTD, Domestic Taxes, Kenya Revenue, Madam Rispa, pointed out in her presentation. She talked of audits and the impact the audit results have on the dispute resolution outcomes. And she says it has a very big impact. So that was a key example that she gave. So God, just to answer to this particular question, is that it is important for us to go back to the drawing board. To go back to the drawing board, and for each senior manager here, it's a challenge that you go back to the drawing board and look at your process. Look at your process and see, have I factored in every other business process that will have an impact on the outcome of my business process? The other key is risk management. Risk management is so key. It is so key, but we tend to ignore it. So in the processes that we are doing, how often do we integrate risk management? Are you having scenarios where the risk management team is constantly knocking at your door? Hey, you need to factor in risk. You need to factor in compliance risks. Are we having such scenarios, or are we having scenarios where if I am in charge of tax base expansion, I sit back and I say, I need to look at the compliance improvement plan. How can I leverage on that to enhance my processes? So these relationships are really key. And as God has illustrated, it is time that we go back to the drawing board. Perhaps you need to form a team that looks at this correlations and interlinkages, but the team that is working, God, is looking at the study and teasing out the different correlations and what it means to the tax administration. And we're further going to gamification. How best can we make this information available to every tax administrator, and how can we make it interesting? So from my desk, if I want to have a better understanding of these correlations, maybe I just need to go to an app and do the mapping and see how best that will work. Maybe I need to play a game and see if I'm looking at research, or I'm looking at dispute resolution, what do I need to factor in? The other thing that this group is doing is looking at a model tax administration. What do I mean by a model tax administration? A model tax administration means the best approach to cluster the business processes. The best approach, it may differ in various ways, and that's why I indicated, yes, to break those silos, then we need to go back and sit and realize what other processes have an impact on my process and improve communication. But we need to look at a model tax administration. Are we saying that having departments is the best approach, or are we saying that we can break the departments, or have the departments, but have a way of having these departments have smaller clusters that will then improve how we operate and then in turn achieve our objective? Back to you, God.
Such great comments, such great comments. And it's not until we really truly start to appreciate it and understand the importance of these linkages can we start to break down those silos, right? Because the mentality of tax administrations for so long has been the functional model. We have to be structured within these enclaves, and we tend to report to outputs as opposed to outcomes. And we tend to not look to the impact that we're having on others, and in some cases we don't care what impact we're having on others. So the better that understanding and appreciation of these linkages gives us that joint responsibility and accountability across the organization, as opposed to these this isolated way of looking at things through the silos. Now, I know Justin wanted to also make a comment.
This is a very passionate subject, and I can tell the participants that this whole thing was really inspired by Canada Revenue Agency, God. And I recall when I was there for training middle and senior managers somewhere in 2018, November, one of the participants, a very senior person, said, when I do my stuff, I don't care what the other people are doing. I don't care. By the time we finished the workshop, and God was one of the students, it was very clear that we actually impact each other. And what is being done is not abstract. It's really following, okay, it follows logic, that's one. Two, we are using artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithms to come up with these very, very clear associations. We are also using, for econometric testing, Canova. It's really amazing what one can see that we were not able to see before very clearly. We may know about it, but we may not see it very clearly. It's a game changer. If we stop the silos, like God said, the people in audit, so it was in the dispute resolution, they were actually very annoyed at that, extremely annoyed at that, because they said, how can we get a D and so on? Well, it now links back. How are you performing your audits? Are you quality assuring them? Are you actually completing your audits? So you're just finishing for the sake of finishing, and that's just throwing them to the next process as well. So I just wanted to mention that all this is not abstract, and I would invite as many of you to actually test run or test drive, these linkages. You'll see some very, very surprising things. And let me emphasize, just like God and Damakrin have done, if you're not working together as a team, very likely silos, you will be competing and pulling down each other rather than supporting each other. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, everyone, for allowing me to participate in this session. I realize we've gone over time, and I'm very appreciative of Damakrin. I sort of threw this at her last minute, and she's such a trooper to have come on at last minute. I think I hit her last night while she was going to bed with a text to say, can you come on and be part of this? So Damakrin, hats off. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much for providing your experience to everyone.
You're most welcome.
They certainly appreciate it. And Glenda, I turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, God. It's been a wonderful presentation, madam. I'm certain the participants will want to have a look at the presentation. So if you could share it with us as well, it would do good, if that's okay with you. And without saying so much, our time is fast spent. Do we have any questions from the participants?
Thank you to the presenters. And my question to God, basing on the assessment reports that we have and basing on their analysis, and it's true that the rate of correlation is high, what is the practical recommendation? What are the process toward making the tool of TADAT as effective as it should be? I submit.
That's a great question. And I think, in fact, the TADAT is evolutionary. It is not static. And I think when we originally look at the TADAT, it's an audit tool. It really tells us how we're performing against international good practice. It gives us an indication of how we're performing against these practices. What this examination of linkages does is allows us to take it to more of an evaluative tool. It helps for us to now look at what the systemic issues are within the organization. It takes work, which is beyond the TADAT. It provides that insight to the tax administration, but the work is now with the tax administration. It has to look at what these linkages look like, what they mean, but then it is up to them to peel away that onion, to find out what those scores mean vis-a-vis other areas that either impact the area that's getting the score or are being impacted by the area that's getting the score.
So guards, thank you so much for sharing with us. Mr. Zake, your hand is up.
The first time Damakrin and the rest of the team saw these linkages that have been derived from machine learning, they were actually pretty shocked. They were very shocked. And the question that came up, is this how we've been running our tax administrations? In silos or more in silos? It was quite a shock. So what we're going to do in the next few weeks or so, we are going to expose more people, including those in this workshop, to the linkages. We would like you to get us some case studies, even in your own tax administrations. It doesn't matter how many, we shall synthesize them, and really publish them as lessons around not working in silos, competing with each other, and pulling others down. Okay, so that will be coming, and watch the space. But thank you very much, Gord, Damakrin, and all the others for listening. For me, this is a game changer, that if we can work together, see who impacts the other. And we already have the various architecture, to show how these linkages actually should be working. Those that are significant, those that are direct, those that are indirect. Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling, but it's very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zake.